Hi everyone, in this video I want to discuss the Azure PaaS services security, and I will take example for this as the SQL DB as a sample of the PaaS services. However, most of what we will discuss today in this series of videos can be applied for something like storage accounts and other services as well. So in this series of videos, we'll have probably 3 videos. The first one, it will be the Azure SQL DB with no connection. Meaning there is no service endpoint and there is no private link. And the second one, we will discuss the service endpoint. The third video, we will discuss the private link. It's a preview service that is available right now. So we'll see the effect of each one on the Azure SQL DB and how we connect to it. The whole environment will be completed by the last video, but we'll start with the first video by simple environment. In this environment, we have in our Azure cloud, we have a virtual network. So this is our VNet named Hub, and inside our virtual network we have a Hub VM. It's a virtual machine that has SQL client on it, and we have Azure SQL DB by itself. There is no connectivity here between them. I will start by doing a demo for the connectivity with the default configuration. We just created the Azure SQL DB, nothing configured yet, and then we will discuss the firewall and what we need to do to allow the virtual machine to connect to it, different configurations. And then we can add an extra step. What if we have a firewall in this VNet? So I'm gonna pause the video right now and let's go to the demo. So we see here the Azure Portal and the Azure SQL DB instance that we have here, or the database. This is the database, and we just created it. There is no changes in the default configurations. You will see here set server firewall. When you click on it, you will notice that we are now in a properties of the server, not the database. So the firewall function is a server function, or a server, it's a server property. By default, this is the default configurations, so we are not allowing anything. First option, and we'll discuss it in a moment, allow Azure services and resources to access this server. It's off. We don't have any IPs and we don't have any virtual networks. Now let's see the effect of this. So I will connect to our Hub virtual machine. This is the database. When I try to connect to this database by double clicking, it will tell me that we cannot connect, and that's because the firewall is preventing us. Because we are using now Azure Data Studio, or the same will be for SQL Server Management Studio. These two clients, they understand Azure and will give us this friendly message to tell us, okay, that's what's going on and this is how to fix it. However, if you are connecting from your application will just give you the generic message that the SQL Server network name cannot be reached. So that's the problem. And the suggestion to fix this is to add the client IP, which is this IP, to the firewall rules. We will not do this by the tool. We'll do this in the firewall settings blade inside the portal. But let's understand what is my client IP. The client IP, and let me move here our diagram. Any virtual network by default in Azure allows any network cards or virtual machines inside it to connect to the public internet. This internet can be the public Azure, which is anything outside the virtual network but inside Azure, like the SQL DB, or even anything completely outside Azure. This is whether or not we have a public IP attached to this machine. in some cases, we attach a public IP to a specific machine so we can connect for inbound traffic. But even if this virtual machine does not have a public IP attached, even if you don't have any public IPs in the VNet, there is always a public IP taken by Azure. You don't see it as a resource, but will be used for connecting to outside the virtual network. How to know which public IP? Then in this case, just open the browser, check what's my IP, and you will get your IP. Okay, so one way, let's get back to the Azure Firewall settings. One way to do this is to add the IP of the machine here as allowed IP to connect to the Azure SQL DB. Okay, that's a good idea. We can try it. But before that, let's check the allow Azure services and resources to access this server. Before we go to this one, let me show you something in the portal. In the portal, we have a query editor, which allows us, using the portal, to connect to the Azure SQL DB. Let me try it. Trying to connect, but it tells me that even the portal cannot connect because of this restriction in the firewall. Even the portal cannot connect to the Azure SQL DB. If we want to connect from the portal, if you want to connect from a machine inside Azure, if you want to connect from the app service inside Azure, if you want to connect from anything inside Azure, in the easiest way to do this, all what you need to do is to get back to the firewall and allow Azure services and resources to access this server. This means we basically allowing anything inside this green area that is Azure to connect to this Azure SQL DB. It can be a virtual machine in a VNet. It can be the Azure Portal, which is living somewhere here. It can be Azure App Service, which again is not included or enclosed by a VNet. If you have multiple VNets, all of them will be accessing the Azure SQL DB. Okay, now let's give it a try. Try to connect, and we are connecting. Let's have a new query, and I created a simple store procedure just to check the connectivity. Who is connected? That's my store procedure. It gets information from the exec sessions and exec connections, and I can see all of them are using my name to connect. The program name is Azure Data Studio. Many connections because the tree view here, the Explorer, is using multiple connections, and all of them are using the client net address of this IP. So this is the IP for this specific machine. Another way to get you the IP of the machine by using just opening everything in the firewall, connect, and then you get your IP. Then you can restrict it further. Okay, so do we need to restrict it further or allow Azure services to be on and that's enough? Well, I will tell you the risk, and everyone will take it based on their own risk policy and what they can accept and what's not. This will allow anything in Azure. Does not mean anything that you own in Azure. It can be someone else. So if I created, this is my subscription provided by Microsoft, but if I created my own personal subscription, maybe even an evaluation subscription, the free one, I can connect from my virtual machine to this SQL Server database because it's allowed for anything in Azure. Does this mean that anyone can connect? Well, we don't have any network restriction, but still we have the authentication layer. So as a hacker, I will go and create an account in Azure. That means Azure will know my identity, because even in the evaluation one, I have to provide a credit card, and then I have to know the name of your server, and then I have to know the username and the password for your database. If these are unknown to me and you are having a policy for recycling your usernames and password or your password, then that's a good measurement. If you want to have a complete isolation from anyone else in Azure and you want to open only for your client, then in this case make the Azure services off, and rule name, let's call this hub VM, the start IP and the end IP. It has trailing spaces. Let me remove them and let's save it. Now, firewall settings will take effect for any new connections. Any connection that is already connected will not be affected by any changes in the firewall. That's why I need to disconnect and then reconnect back again. In this case, I'm allowed, not because everyone in Azure is allowed, but this specific IP is allowed. Okay, and we know now how to get the IP. Either open your browser, or if you have a machine that does not have a user interface, just ping any service on the internet, like doing wget or any HTTP request to get the IP. Or you can just open it for anything in Azure, use the SQL Server DMVs to find what is the client IP and then use this client IP. Okay, this is in a simple environment where you have few machines connecting. It's not complicated, not enterprise environment. But if we have so many machines in this VNet, how can we manage this? Typically, you have a gateway or a firewall that is taking your requests and moving them out of your VNet. Otherwise, no single machine will be allowed to communicate with the internet outbound by itself. So I did something, I want to show it to you as well. So before I show you the demo, let's first make sure that we understand the new addition to our environment here. Right now we saw the VNet, the virtual machine. We tried to connect directly, and we knew now the settings that we need to add for the firewall properties of this virtual server that hosts the Azure SQL DB. In an enterprise environment, typically you will not just have virtual machines and everyone is connecting to the internet without having one entry point that takes all the outbound requests and filter them first and allows some of them and disallow others, which is what we call it firewall. So let me take this area and that will be our firewall. Okay, so to create firewall, there are so many partners that you can use inside Azure, but in this demo I use the Azure first party firewall service. To create this service, you need to have a dedicated subnet, and then you create the firewall inside this subnet. It's a PaaS offering. It's automatically managed. It can scale up and down, scale out and in by itself, and you just pay for the traffic that you are passing through this firewall. All right, so for the subnet that hosts the machine to communicate to the firewall, we need to add something else, which is user-defined routing or UDR. So this will be a UDR. In this UDR, we will say if a machine here or anything inside this subnet, when it wants to communicate with outside, you have first to go to the firewall, and then the firewall has to have a rule to allow the traffic going to the Azure SQL DB or not. Okay, so let's see this in the demo. So we are here back in the Azure Portal home screen, and the very first thing that we'll go to will be the virtual machine that we were in, or we are trying to connect from. This virtual machine is connected to this virtual network. So I'm gonna click on this one, which will take me to my virtual network. You see here, this is the type is virtual network, and I can see in this virtual network I have 2 network cards connected to it. One of them is actually coming from the firewall, so I have the firewall already created. If you go to the subnet, I will see the subnet that hosts my virtual machine is actually called default. Connect to the default, and then we need to attach to it a routing table. I already created this routing table. I will show you the settings in a moment, but I want to have this routing table associated with this subnet, and then I will get back and show you our routing table. So this is the hub routing, and when you go to the routes here, I have only one route, which is to the internet. This is the name. In this one, I'm saying if we are trying to, the destination or the desired destination is the internet, and this is how we say internet, basically all zeros, then the next hub has to be connecting first to a virtual appliance, and this is the internal IP of the firewall. The firewall will have 2 IPs, one internal and one external. So what we are trying to do right now is, for anything inside the default subnet, if you want to connect to the internet, first go to the firewall. Then I want to see what's in the firewall. If you want to go to the firewall here, that's our firewall. This is the name on the top, and in this one in here we see the type of the resource. It's a firewall. When you go to the rules, we have different types of rules. The one that we are interested in will be network rule. I have only one network rule. Let's see the settings of this rule. This rule is depending on something called service tag. So let's explain this in details. Rules can be 2 things, can be IP addresses or service tags. So if I know the IP address of what I'm allowing or preventing, then I should use IP addresses, give it a name, choose the protocol, the source address, destination address, and destination ports. Simple. Now, how can I tell what's the IP address of the Azure SQL database? And how can I be sure that this IP address will be always the same? Because this is a managed service, it can be changed. Azure is releasing all the public IP address for all the services. You can go and download it. There is actually 2 ways to get them. You just search for Azure IP address ranges for all the services. You download a file, it's an XML file that has all the IP addresses for all the services in all the regions. So if you're interested in what is the Azure SQL DB IPs in East US or Canada Central, and you can get this from this file. Recently as well, I believe it's still in preview, we have an API for this, so you can have an API calling Azure and telling Azure, give me the IP list of this service in this location. Then you can get this programmatically, and your application can accommodate any changes right away. That's for the IPs. However, since this is an Azure service, then it makes more sense to have it like predefined or out of the box experience from Azure Firewall, since it's an Azure service. That's why we have something called service tag. So service tag is, if you want to define it, it's a range of public IPs that define a specific service. So here I have the name of the rule, to SQL. The protocol is TCP. Source address star. It can be star or can be specific source address, and the source address in this case can be the private IP of my machine. So if I have 2 machines, I want to have only one of them to connect to the SQL database, but the other one should not connect to the SQL database, then I should use the internal IP for one of the machines here. The service tag, and as you can see here, we have all the Azure services that support service tag, and SQL Server is one of them. So if I have Event Hub, for example, which is exactly from the network perspective, it's exactly like Azure SQL DB, then I should use Event Hub. And destination port, I know that it will connect to the default port, but I don't care about this here. So again, the service tag network role, I define a name, the protocol, the source IP address, and the service tag that I'm allowing to connect. What tells me that it's allowed, not prevented, because here the action is allowed. Let's save this one. I'm updating the firewall right now. So in this case, when we are connecting, what I'm expecting here, let me move back to our diagram. The connection will start from the virtual machine, will try to go out to the internet, will be redirected because of the user-defined routing, will send it to the firewall. The firewall will find an allow rule that tells that dictates that the traffic that is going to the Azure SQL DB is being allowed. Then we can connect to the Azure SQL DB in this case. Okay, let's test this. Oh, one last thing. Now, in the Azure SQL DB, what do you need to do in the firewall? In this case, you need to allow the IP for not the VNet that we got last time, but for the firewall. Okay, so the firewall itself has a public IP. So let's test this and we'll see. This is our firewall. It has a private IP, which is this one, we use it already, and public IP configurations. This is the public IP. Let's take this one and let's go back to the SQL database. Set the firewall. The rule name will be hub firewall. This is the start and the end. The rules can take a range of IPs, not specific IP, not only one. In this case, the range will start and end with the same IP. Let's save it. So we are now connected, and let's confirm that the IP is coming from the firewall IP. So again, I'm going to execute my procedure, who is connected, and let's go to the IP addresses for the client, and as you can see, it's the IP address for the firewall. Okay, so anyone in this VNet will be connected from one IP, which is the IP of the firewall. All right, so by this one, I think we covered the connectivity when there is no service endpoint and there is no private link. There is no connection between the VNet and the Azure SQL DB. I'm gonna stop here the first video just to make it short, and I will start the second video of this series, which is using the service endpoint.